friends, and welcome to the 1840 podcast, where each month we explore a different topic balancing modern sensibilities with traditional sensitivities to give you new approaches to timeless Jewish ideas. I'm your host, David Beshefkin, and this month we're continuing our exploration of the war in Israel. This podcast is part of a larger exploration of those big, juicy Jewish ideas, so be sure to check out 1840.org, that's 18forty.org, where you can also find videos, articles, recommended readings, and weekly emails. There was a very moving article that I recently read by Rabbi Moshe Tarragon in the New Jersey Jewish Link, of all places. I don't know if that's where it was originally published. It's called Israel, version 3.0. And I found it very moving because in a lot of ways it mirrors a lot of the issues that I have been seeing in America, a lot of the almost boredom that you sometimes see in America. I'm talking obviously pre-October 7th. And at the heart of this article is the notion of the struggle of being the third generation. And I'd like to read a segment of this article because I found it so important. Rabbi Moshe Tarragon is somebody I know, absolutely wonderful. We had his brother on a few weeks ago. But Rabbi Moshe Tarragon is somebody who I really admire, the way his passion and excitement for a vision for Eretz Yisrael and Amchi Yisrael. And this is what he writes about the third generation of Israel. We are the third generation of the modern state of Israel. The first generation of pioneers fought numerous wars to reassert our rights to our national homeland. The first round of wars defended our basic rights to a homeland, while the second wave of wars solidified our borders and returned us to the biblical territories of Israel, including Yerushalayim. The second generation of Israel achieved financial stability and subsequently built an economic superpower. In addition, the second generation advanced worldwide aliyah, beckoning Jews to return to the land of history, which had now started to flow with milk, honey, and with economic prospects. Finally, the second generation began the arduous process of forging peaceful relations with those Arab neighbors willing to embrace our presence in our rightful homeland. Many doubted whether the third generation of Israel could sustain the idealism of the first two generations. The current TikTok generation was born into a prosperous country, and they didn't face existential struggles. How would this generation respond to adversity? Would they display selflessness and dedication to Jewish history? Were they too comfortable for patriotic spirit and too addicted to screens to care about long-term ideals? Would Israel suffer the curse of the third generation? And what he answers, and what I hope most of you instinctively understand is the answer, is a resounding yes. It is a resounding yes, particularly in these moments following this existential threat that still looms over us following the events of October 7th and the terrorist attack of Hamas. We are seeing a moment where people are rising to the occasion in incredible ways. And it's something I want to continue to emphasize and highlight, and what our conversation today is all about. I am talking to Michael Eisenberg, who, aside from being an incredible investor, he runs the VC fund called Aleph. Really, over the past few weeks, he has emerged as one of the most outspoken voices defending, not just defending Israel, but pushing a vision of what Eretz Yisrael, of what Israel can mean for the Jewish people, and really even more so for the entire world. He's been in the news the last week or two, and we talk a little bit about it. He probably, I think for sure, has the most read Hebrew tweet of all time, or X-post, whatever you want to call it. He had an interaction with Elon Musk, who responded directly to one of his tweets, ultimately getting a response of having Elon Musk himself quote a pasuk in Mishlei, a verse in Proverbs, which was really quite a moment. But that is really just almost a side note and a distraction from the larger vision and the larger issues that Michael sees of the potential of this moment to create a civic revolution in Israel that can be a model for the entire world, which is why it is my absolute privilege and pleasure. This conversation has been a long time coming. Michael's been an incredible supporter of our work, a listener, and I'm so grateful that he joined us today. Without further ado, here is our conversation with Michael Eisenberg. I want to begin by talking a little bit about social media, which is not usually the starting point where people speak to you, but I think you and I have kind of shifted in different ways, but we've really shifted what we have been using social media for quite explicitly. Like, it's a very obvious. You've been giving these very long updates, sometimes in English, sometimes in Hebrew, and you have caught the world's attention because you had an interaction with Elon Musk on Twitter that I think now has the record, you had mentioned this to me, for probably the most read Hebrew tweet of all time, probably the most read Bible quote on Twitter on all time, where Elon Musk responded to you quoting a pasuk from the 16th chapter of Proverbs of Mishlei. Kno chachma ma tov mecharetz uknos bina nivchar mikesef. Don't worry, I'm going to translate. How much better is it to acquire wisdom than gold? To acquire understanding is preferable to silver. It's not the main reason why we're speaking today, but I just wanted to almost get it out of the way. Tell us a little bit about the interaction you had with Elon Musk on Twitter.
I normally don't talk about my interactions with people I meet in general. I'm pretty discreet about these things. But there was a campaign in parts of the Israeli media and Jewish media, by the way, against Elon, claiming that he was anti-Semitic and criticizing both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Minister Benny Gantz and others for having spent so much time with him and taking him down to the south. And I think that is a terrible misreading of the situation. I have many, many friends who are very close to Elon. I had not met him before that time, who have sworn up and down that he's not anti-Semitic. And I sat through this meeting with him together with the Prime Minister and other people. There's a picture floating around as to who's in there. I won't mention the names. And it was very obvious that he was touched, affected, and even emotional about what went on in the South. He committed to the president of Israel and to the families of some of the hostages that he'd wear the dog tag of the hostages. And then the next day, he was at the New York Times Deal Book Conference with Andrew Ross Sorkin, and he had the dog tag hanging. And I just thought, my tweet was before that New York Times conference appearance, that it was important to set the record straight on a few things. One, about Musk himself and a lot of the accusations leveled against him. By the way, the tweet that everyone gets on him about, he apologized for at the Deal Book Conference. Halavai that we had leaders, politicians, and even rabbis who would apologize for things they say. And then the second part of it is, I think it's important to understand this new world of social media, but particularly Twitter and what it's about. And so I spent some time describing what open source Twitter is about and why that's different from closed source software, closed source news. And then the third thing I tackled is, what is Elon Musk today? And I think that Elon Musk today, if you think about it, is like a country without land. He may end up on Mars and have some land too, but he has energy infrastructure, read electricity. That's the batteries at Tesla and the solar panels from Solar City, which was bought by Tesla, and the battery walls. And he has rockets, right? Which one could look at missiles to put things into space. And he has a communications network called Starlink and Starshield that goes along with it. And he's got the Boring Company, which drives infrastructure. I mean, the guy has really set up the foundations of a country and a media company called X or Twitter, which he's planning to turn into a super app that includes financial services. And so look at the guy. He's like a head of state. And even months ago, I had tweeted that, when he joked with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's the next most important to the president, or maybe the unofficial president of the United States. I think it's true. And in general, I think we're headed to a world, whether we like it or not, in which mega corporations, but particularly people who control artificial intelligence and big technology companies and compute infrastructure, have the power of nation states. And the last thing I'll say is, I joked, and now it's turned into the truth, that people need to respect Elon in particular, because one tweet from Elon is equal to, the New York Times, CNN, Haaretz, and, you name it combined. And then this tweet of mine in Hebrew gets read over 30 million times. And people spend time translating it, and there's a pasuk in Mishlei. Listen, I don't know how to break this to all your rabbinic listeners out there, but I don't think all the Tanakh teachers in the history of yeshiva day schools in America did more to teach Sefer Mishlei, or maybe any pasuk in Tanakh, than Elon Musk. And looking at Mishlei. When was the last time some kid, a Jewish kid in America, opened up the middle of Sefer Mishlei? I'll tell you the answer. Never. And so here we are.
And I was actually incorrect. The most read tweet, it's not Elon's response, it's what you wrote. That has 30 million views.
By the way, and it mentions a base medrash, my tweet. We gave exposure to the Jewish concept of base medrash around the world. Baruch Hashem.
It really is remarkable. I'm just curious, just like technically, when did you see him pop in your feed? What were you doing? In polite company, I always try to pretend that I'm not paying attention to Twitter. And usually I'm successful at it. I'm not always paying attention to Twitter. But if Elon Musk responded to one of my tweets, I would probably, I'd probably cancel the rest of the meeting. Were you like in the middle of your day?
I was in the middle of the day and my phone started buzzing and I opened my WhatsApp. and like 10 people had sent me a screenshot of it. And so I look at it, I go, I'm not going to do this in the middle of a meeting. I waited to get out. And by that point, I had 20 people who sent me this screenshot. And I said, I probably should take a look at this. And I did. Listen, I don't say this to one of my kids just called me in and, says made the news in Israel because Elon Musk tweeting in Hebrew is news in Israel, particularly has gotten like 30 million views. And one of my kids said to me, who's getting like, people are sending her the kind of screenshots of this, Dad, you got to take down the tweet and get rid of it, etc. My friends are sending me these things about you and I don't want to be exposed to this, and now they want to be my friend or whatever it is. So
the hazards of having older children. Thank God my kids are too young. They're suspicious what I'm doing a lot of the time on the phone, but they don't yet know about Twitter. But I want to ask you more generally. I think after October 7th, a lot of the discourse on social media has changed quite a bit. You have become extraordinarily active and really trying to promote and center the importance of Israel, obviously through the hordes of what's happening online on social media. Do you have a specific strategy of what are you trying to accomplish? Like you tweeted in Hebrew. I rarely, sometimes I'll share just a pasuk, a verse from the Torah in Hebrew. What exactly are you trying to share specifically on social media? I think you're using Twitter, X, most frequently. I'm curious what exactly you are trying to accomplish.
First of all, thank you for thinking that I have a strategy. When the war started, I thought that there'd be few voices out there that could describe in English what's going on to the average Israeli family, the average Israeli person, the average parents of soldiers. I mentioned to you before we came on, we have 5 kids, including our sons-in-law, who have been called in, one of whom is in his mandatory military service, and 4 of them are in Gaza. Life's changed here in a pretty meaningful way. And so someone who could bridge kind of across the Atlantic and also talk to an audience that's not necessarily Jewish. My day job is I'm a venture capitalist. I have a large number of friends and colleagues who aren't Jewish and are in the business world. And so I just wanted to convey what was going on. I have a separate audience that was at least separate until recently in Israel. I've written, as you know, a fair number of books in Hebrew, a couple in English.
Sure.
And I operate in the Israeli tech scene. And so during the war, I hadn't tweeted much in Hebrew. I did that before. But when I comment on, Israeli public affairs and politics or what's going on in the Israeli populace, I tend to do that in Hebrew. And so my general strategy has been, general approach, it's not a strategy, is I want to talk about civic society in Israel. And that's the perspective I spent most of my time on. Well, by the way, even before the war, there's a podcast that I did about a year and a half ago with a fellow named Eldad Yaniv, in which I described that the future of Israel will be based on orchestration of civil society rather than government management, which is, of course, anathema to the foundings of the state, most of the way things run here. And I've been attempting to explain that phenomenon already since 2015. Now the war has accelerated it, obviously.
Yeah, I want to talk about that phenomenon. I saw a while, it was not a very significant interview, but it may be something that you've repeated many, many times, where you described yourself, your Zionism, your cut of Zionism, as a Herzlian Zionist. Now, I don't know if you are backtracking on that, but you had mentioned it because of the emphasis of kind of this groundswells of civic organization. It struck me because you were also quite obviously and prominently observant, meaning you are a religious Israeli, and usually I would expect people who identify publicly with the vision of Theodore Herzl would not be quite as engaged religiously as you are in Israeli society. So I'm curious if we could almost begin with that as a starting point, because you have been writing about this constantly, and always as a topic I almost need to confess. When we met in New York, you spoke about a lot of this. I wouldn't say it went over my head, but it did not have the urgency of this moment. I think a lot of people, the ideas that they were saying, I have a few, specific people in mind, you're absolutely one of them, have been saying things for a long time that people are like, okay, add it to the list. I don't know when I'm going to have time to think about this, but it's not right now. But you have been talking about the importance of civic renewal in Israel for quite some time. It predates the judicial reforms. So explain to me from ground one, what kind of Zionist are you? You were not raised in Israel. You were not born in Israel, though you've raised a family there. What brought you to Israel, and what is at the heart of your vision of Zionism?
How long do we have?
Let's see what you could pack in, because we do have a lot more to talk about. But I like starting from ground one of what motivates you, because you're not the typical olim. You are outspoken, and you seem to have a very clear vision and philosophy that you are trying to center among a lot of other distracting noise that try to grab people's attention. So I want to start from the ground up. What is your vision? What almost like brought you to Israel? Why would you describe yourself? Pick any one of these questions. They're all going to lead to the same point. Describe yourself as a Herzlian Zionist.
So I'll back up. So I grew up on the west side of Manhattan. I went to Manhattan Day School and MTA, and I grew up in a Zionist family. Although my family's been in America for a very long time, we had no family members, directly up the line in Europe when World War II broke out. And so I went to yeshiva like many high school kids do after my freshman year of college, and I went to the Gush. And 1 year turned into 2 years. It was commonly referred to at the time as Shana Bet. It wasn't as popular as it is today. And the Gulf War broke out during my second year at the Gush in Israel. When the Gulf War ended on Purim Day, and I can spend a lot of time talking about the Gulf War then and things I saw, but I found myself in a room with Harav Yehuda Amital, who was the Rosh Yeshiva at the time. And candidly, I didn't have much of a relationship with him. I went to the Gush because Rabbi Michael Hecht, Hashem Shasena Refuah Shlema, told me, you need to go learn by Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. That's what he said. You got to go learn by Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. And he repeated that to me many times, and I'm forever indebted to him for that. And I went to the Gush and I had a relationship with Rav Aaron Shir. But after the Gulf War, I found myself in a room with Rav Amital, and I asked him like a yeshiva bacher question. I said, is it a bigger mitzvah, bigger commandment of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, of settling in the land of Israel, for somebody who moves to Israel and goes to the Negev or the Galil? Or is Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv, populated cities, the same mitzvah? And he looked at me and he said, Zakol Shtiot, it's all nonsense. Your question is nonsense. You need to make Aliyah, move to Israel and set up a factory to employ 10,000 people so that they can earn an honest and decent living. That would be the biggest mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Like my jaw dropped. I've been in yeshiva education my whole life. Never heard anyone talk about the economy as a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz. And basically I decided I'd move and try to employ 10,000 people. And that became like a life's goal.
I mean, usually the phrasing of, again, that's why it's a yeshiva bacher question. Usually it's just like, where should I live? What's the frommest community? What's the best community? What has the most resources, best schools, etc.? And he gave you an economic answer. He told you should come here, set up a factory, provide employment for other people, which has been a fairly central part of your kind of like aliyah persona, has been finding employment, though I don't believe you run a factory.
No, I don't run a factory. So look, factories in the 21st century are high-tech companies. So I try to enable them. I started my career in political consulting for a year and a half, and I figured out politicians don't enable people to earn honest and decent livings. And so I couldn't fulfill what Rav Amital suggested by staying there. But the story about Rav Amital is not just said employ people, it said so that they should earn an honest and decent living, what he called parnasah b'chavod. I mean, the words, I can still hear him saying it today. And that word of parnasah b'chavod, honest and decent living, has kind of stuck with me. And I explored it with him afterwards also, which is when people earn an honest and decent living, they have more dignity. When people earn an honest and decent living, their marriages are better. When people earn an honest and decent living, they become contributing members of society. There's something foundationally deep there about self-efficacy that is really, really important. And it has become a major component of my writings of what I see in the Torah as well. Fast forward that, I have pursued civic strategies since then. I chair the largest volunteer organization in Israel called the Shomer HaChadash, the New Guardians, which protects farmers and ranchers. That's how it started. And now in this war, by the way, we're sending 4,000 volunteers plus a day to work on farms because many of the Thailandis who work the farms in Israel have left. And so civic activism, civic self-efficacy is, I think, not just a Jewish value, it's an Israeli value. And I've turned this into what I believe is a political philosophy, and this requires just a moment on technology, if I can.
Please.
My day job is that I'm an investor. I have a venture capital fund called Aleph that we invest in Israeli startup companies. We are unabashedly blue and white. We only invest in Israeli companies. We want to raise the tide in Israel so that all the boats here rise and we can create a booming economy so that people can earn an honest and decent living. It's my view of technology that the law of technology is diffusion. If you look around, right, if you got a smartphone in your pocket, that used to be a supercomputer 25 years ago, but that supercomputer had to be in a room, and now you've got a smartphone in your pocket. If you look at artificial intelligence for what it is, it makes people more superhuman, so to speak. It enables them to become more powerful versions of themselves. And broadly, we can say technology is diffusion. It's getting, friend Josh Wolf likes to say,
it's a multiplier.
It gets closer, more than that. It also gets closer to your body, right? So it becomes a multiplier of individual efficacy, gets closer to your body as well, and we get more power on the edge of the network. And I think societies tend to follow the arc of technology. If we go back to the printing press, some of what happened in Europe to take power away from the Catholic Church. By the way, if you look at our own religion, my own view is what popularized the Shulchan Aruch, the codification of Jewish law, was because it's the first one printed after the invention of the printing press. That's why the Ramah had to glom onto the Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Karo and not produce his own book. It was too late. The distribution was out. And so this generally follows the arc of technology. And I think technology is enabling people to be more powerful. Going back to our conversation on Twitter X, I mean, when in the history of humanity was a guy like Michael Eisenberg able to tweet at the President of the United States or at the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the world? I'm a nobody. Yet I can talk to these people, right? Or at least feel like I am. And in one case out of a million, they might even respond. And so this massive diffusion is going on. And therefore, when you play this movie forward, I think what you're going to see is far more empowered citizens around the world. But Israel, because of the army, because of mandatory military service, because of the esprit de corps generated by that, is ground zero for civic movements. It is the perfect beta site for what's going on in the world. And if you go back to what happened before this war, there was a big fight in Israel about the judicial reform. Or that
sure.
Right. What happened was there were technology tools put into use by the various factions in this battle that were then turned on at the beginning of the war to help people. You could look at a podcast. I did a podcast of mine called Invested with a guy who saved hundreds of people on October 7th because he used the WhatsApp groups and the tools created for the judicial reform. And so Israel has activated technology tools for civic involvement at a level you have not seen anywhere else at this point.
I just want to pause you right there because that's such a remarkable story that you have. I wouldn't call it a competing podcast. We have very different audiences, but it's an important podcast. But you have this remarkable story. Just sit with that for 10 more seconds about somebody who used the very infrastructure, technological infrastructure that was used to organize rallies on, I don't know, whatever side judicial reform to help save people on October 7th. Just to hear that seems incredibly moving and kind of highlights the transformation of what was so very recently such a divisive society and what has used technology and the very tools that divided the society to come back and come together.
Yeah, it's a little bit, we say, I think it's Tosos in Gittin and a few other places that HaKadosh Baruch Hu makdim tshuva l'makah. It's also in the Medrash and a few places that God, brings the medicine before he brings the evil. That's why Gittin comes before Kedushin in the Talmud. I think it's true here too. No one would realize that terrible strife could have saved people's lives 10 months later. And it's just remarkable. The guy's name is Ami Daniel, and there are others. I encourage all your listeners, if they understand Hebrew, and we're trying to get English subtitles on it, to see a 30-minute show about a friend of mine called Erez Eshel and this young 18-year-old kid named Noam and how they jumped into action on the morning of October 7th and saved hundreds of people. It's remarkable. But these guys, they weren't in the army, they weren't in the government. They just picked their car up and went and, dove into the action and dove into, the terrorist fire. And this is, I don't want to say it's uniquely Israeli because I think the world needs to learn from this. And I'll tell you something about that in a second. But we are in a moment. We are in a transformational moment of history. This is a Tanakh level event, what happened in Israel around civic society, where governments are getting weaker, multinational corporations are getting stronger, individuals that are able to band together and create trust and cohesiveness are becoming forces to reckon with. And this is true, and authority is being challenged. I wrote about this in my last book on Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. Also, there's a mass diffusion going on of power, and it threatens the power structure, not only of the last 2,000 years, but of the last 200 years. And this is true in state, country, religion, press, everything you can imagine. And I think we need to turn this. I think Israel can be ground zero for civic empowerment that makes this work. It's what I like to call in my last book, Umala Aretz Deas Hashem Kamayim Le'am Mechasim, that the whole world will become infused with the knowledge of God, just like the water covers the oceans.
There's something in the branding, and I'm being honest with you, there's something about the word civics that is a turn off. It's not an exciting word. And that's why I want to come back and I want you to describe even more clearly. You mentioned that there's a role of the army in what actually helps people mobilize. I can only imagine now, and hopefully you could tell us a little bit more, that I would expect army service to be the ultimate disruptor in civic society. You have to spend time away in the military. You could be in the United States, you're taking the prime of your early 20s and you're going to university, you're learning, you're doing this, and instead you're doing basic training, you're doing shmirah. In the time of war, you're really putting your life at stake. And in a lot of ways, I would think the whole economy right now is probably shut down in a lot of ways in Israel. Why is it that Israeli society is specifically primed for a civic revolution, almost a citizen revolution? Not to to, God forbid, overthrow the government, but to be empowered in ways that are able to work in unison with a government body.
We're having an open conversation, Reb David?
Totally open.
Okay. What matters in life is responsibility. Israeli society teaches responsibility at a very, very, very young age because everyone's in the military. Even the kids running the youth groups are not these college kids at Yeshiva University or Columbia or NYU, but it's high school kids because the college age kids, those are off in yeshiva for a year or two, but the rest of them are in the army. And so we teach responsibility at a young age. And then I give a kid a weapon at 18, 19, 20 and say, you're responsible for his life, his life, his life, and his life. And you need to be responsible to treat a weapon responsibly as well. And even the kids in the technology units were giving big budgets. And if they get it right, it's measured in saving people's lives. And if they get it wrong, as happened on October 7th, it's measured in losing people's life.
God forbid, yeah.
Unfortunately, God didn't forbid it on October 7th. And it happened.
Yeah.
It's like someone said to me, Hashem Yishmor, Lo Shamar. And when you're an 18-year-old kid, and I'm going to be very direct with you, David, because I think it needs to be heard. At Harvard, you're entitled and think you have rights and not responsibilities. And when an 18, 20-year-old kid futzing around in the dorm, you think you got rights and no responsibilities, and you're planning your career. But when you go to the military here, you learn that life is about responsibility. Life is about trade-offs. Life is about owning it. And not only that, we have a funny view of the world. I write this in my Sefer on Vayikra too, which is, if I agree with you, so I'll work together with you, right? Because we get along. That's not the way getting along happens. The way getting along happens is you sweat together. The way getting along happens is you're forced to go through tough things together. And when these kids, I say, when we go do field work together, we sweat together out in the field, and we get to know each other because we experience something viscerally together. And when you go to the military and you're reliant on each other, it doesn't matter your political views because you're my brother. And we develop brotherhood. And this is why, by the way, when Moshe Rabbeinu, when the 2.5 tribes came to him and said, we don't want to go, he got so angry.
You're referring to the incident. I'm just jumping in to give a little context. You're referring to the incident at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, which talks about the 2 tribes who did not want to cross over the Jordan River and enter into the land of Israel. And Moshe responds.
Moshe Rabbeinu responds to them saying, this is exactly what your forefathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to go spy or check out the land. And they dissuaded people. They didn't do it together. And Moshe Rabbeinu understood that if you don't fight together, you don't stick together. And when they went back, it almost fell apart at the end of the book of Joshua, Sefer Yoshua, right? Because they assumed they had bad intentions. I just came back. Unfortunately, my cousin was killed yesterday. This is my second cousin to be killed.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
I just came back from Mincha and Ma'ariv about 4 hours ago at the Shiva house, sitting around in a circle. And I have a picture. I took just a picture of their boots because you can't show their faces. Okay? Boots and guns. Were people from all walks of society in this country, people who grew up in all sorts of places. And you should have heard them. They were all brothers. They fought together. They stood together. They spoke beautifully about each other. And they were in it together. And that is the esprit de corps. And that happens here because people here take responsibility. Now, I'll tell you this. We have a lot of yeshiva kids who come from America, who come to our house for Shabbos all the time. The level of maturity of my 20-year-old in the Army or my 18-year-old in the Army versus the American yeshiva kids who come here is night and day.
How do you notice that? I'm just curious.
The topics they can talk about, they're able to talk about what they know and what they felt through and what they've been through. You see it all over the place. And that's why this society breeds responsible civilians. It's why Noam, at age 18, with Erez Eshel, age 56, 57, jumped in to the south of the country. It's why when Ami Daniel called me on the morning of October 7th, the simplest Torah morning, when I turned on my phone, where I realized something was up, and he called me and said, I need you to find me people down south. I knew I would find people down south, people who are far more brave than I am, people who are far more responsible than I am, who drove down there as soon as they heard something was up at 6:30 in the morning, and we're down there already and taking responsibility. This is ground zero. Today, even in America, because of cancel culture, we don't have people willing to stand up and express their opinions because they might get canceled. And here we got kids who are running into a disaster zone in front of terrorists and risking their lives. I lost one cousin on the first day of the battle. He ran right out of his house on Simchas Torah, went right out of the minyan. There was a family minyan, which I wasn't at, I was somewhere else. He ran right out of there and down south and was killed in Kfar Aza. Untold bravery. Untold bravery. but it comes from a place of responsibility. You go to these funerals one after another, it's the one thing you hear. They knew how to take responsibility. They understood what life is about. They understood that if you don't stand up and protect it and risk yourself, there's nothing to do. And that's a giant difference. We need to say it. It's a giant difference between kids growing up here and when I grew up in America and what you grew up with or kids are growing up with in the Jewish community. And that gulf is going to expand right now because this society is accelerating in terms of civilian responsibility dramatically. And I think, we can talk about this more, but the world is going to move from management to orchestration because the job of government here is going to become to orchestrate civilian movements rather than manage all these efforts. I mean, look now, the government can't handle this. We have 200,000 people displaced from their homes. The government can't handle it. It's all civilian.
I want you to explain a little bit more, just on a very technical aspect, economically, is Israel going to be able to survive this? You have your ear to the ground in terms of just your companies. Most of Israel is now on the front lines. They're serving for many, many months. We didn't have this percent of the population in America after 9/11. How does Israel emerge from this in a healthy way? And secondly, how should the character of Israel change following these events, specifically the civic character? Do you think this is something that can really be put in a bottle? We've heard so many people say, I hope this unity continues forever, but unity needs a process. Unity needs infrastructure. Unity needs the urgency of the moment that we have now. So tell me a little bit just economically, because economics, as Rav Amital taught us earlier in this conversation, is a lot more than just, making money. It is the dignity of the country itself. It is the dignity of familial lives. It is the integrity of the society itself. How's Israel able to survive during this time with so much of the economy chugging along, not at full speed? And what, in a larger sense, do you want to be transformed in civic society in Israel? Is it what we're already seeing? Is it something else entirely?
Those are a lot of questions in there. So number one, I have a piece that's appearing in the next issue of Tradition on what should a uniquely Jewish or Israeli economy look like. And by the way, I prefer the term Israeli because it comes from Bnei Israel rather than Jewish. I think Jewish is an exile name, which comes from Judah, probably from the book of Esther, which I've written about as well.
Sure you have.
I prefer the word Israel. And so I have this piece coming in Tradition about what does a uniquely Israeli economy look like. It has a lot of these topics of empowering the other and looking at how we increase people's revenue rather than just looking at the cost cutting, because obviously the topic of cost of living in the Jewish community has reached a feverish pitch in the U.S. And so that's kind of point one, which is we have to ask ourselves, what's the economy that we want? And I want to point out that what's going on now in Israel is a statement that we need to live and defeat evil before we can talk about the economy, which, by the way, I think is going to be fine, and I'll come to in a second. But in the priorities of life for the people of Israel writ large, including you and your listeners in America, the state of Israel needs to be successful at this war. The people of Israel need to be successful at this war, and the state of Israel needs to prosper. Okay? I don't need to tell you what's going on in America, American college campuses right now. You probably know better than I do. But for the sake of our people, the Jewish people, it's on the line right now in this moment of history. And we need to do this proudly with our heads held high.
What do you think is on the line right now?
The safety and prosperity of the Jewish people. That's what I think is on the line right now. You walk around and you see the anti-Semitic attacks on Jewish businesses in America, okay? People taking off their yarmulkes, people taking off their mezuzahs in places that you and I know. And the state of Israel and the people of Israel have given the Jews of America and France and England safety, prosperity, and a way to stand tall over the last 75 years. That's a fact, okay? Initially, it was the people of diaspora supported the people of Israel, but it's the strength of Israel, particularly, I think, since 1967, which has turned the tide for world Jewry. And we all need that. You need it like I need it, like my kids need it, like our grandchildren need it. And so that's point one. Point two, I live in the high-tech world. We talked about the resilience of Israeli civic society. The resilience of Israeli high-tech is stunning. There was a guy who tweeted, I don't know him, he's a venture capitalist like I am, he's not Jewish. He said something I never expected to hear on a board call, a board of directors call, which is, we're missing 50% of our staff who's been called up to reserve duty, but we're going to beat our numbers this quarter, right? We're going to exceed expectations this quarter. And we're seeing this all over the place. Our companies have 10 to 20% of their people called up to reserves, and they're delivering. There's even this campaign going on, Israeli Tech Delivers. And that's what they're doing. And it is incredible and it is inspiring. They are just delivering. And I'm optimistic about the Israeli economy. I'm a little less sanguine about the way I think the government is managing the budget, but we'll hopefully get through that. And I think, again, civic society has spoken up about this. You mentioned something else, which is unity. I think there is an emphasis in the U.S. and in diaspora Jewry on this notion of unity because you have no power issues. Although I think the fissures in U.S. Jewry shown around the rally to Washington and should speak volumes about the underlying issues. But nonetheless, because we have politics and power in Israel, and we spent 2,000 years without politics and power, so the dynamics of political power didn't play their way out. And that shows up in what you would call a lack of unity, and I prefer to call just, the extremis of passion. And people will take things a little far. I don't know that when this war is over, if it's over, I think it's going to go on a lot longer than most people think, whether there will be quote unquote unity. I think there will be unity of purpose among the civilians. I don't know that politicians know how to do that in this day and age. My cousin who spoke at the Levaya today, at the funeral today, said that we need leadership that is worthy of the people of this country. And if they can't get their egos out of the way, they should get out of the way. And I agree with her. And we have to focus on creating a narrative for the Jewish people that takes us to the next 75, 150 years of the Jewish people. We need to think in those time periods. We don't have a narrative. 1948 narrative is we need an Ir Miklat. We need a place to run to for the Jewish people. But we've grown past that. And now we need an ethos for the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And it's changing.
I want to pause you again because I think that is such a profound idea, especially now, after October 7th, our thinking has been so laser focused. We're thinking in terms of hours, days, maybe a week. I don't know how long ago Sukkot was, but before October 7th, I acutely felt the lack of narrative for the Jewish people. Rabbi Moshe Tarragon recently wrote about the struggles of the third generation. The struggles of, we're not the generation who created, we're not the generation who kind of built off of that foundation. We're the generation, and when I say we, I'm describing in many ways both Israeli and diaspora Jewry. My grandparents were, that fought in World War II. One was a rabbi, the first of his kind, and my parents' generation were the ones who built off of that prosperity. They went to college, they got jobs, they got careers. And my generation, and certainly my students of the current generation, I don't want to use the word apathy, I don't want to dunk on anybody, and certainly I'm not talking about American Jewry right now. There's almost like a boredom of what are we here to create? In many ways, what I've accused a lot of American Jewry is we're just trying to recapture the childhood that we've experienced and pay it forward to our own children. That they should have the same lifestyle that our kids have, which very often, especially now economically, could be nearly impossible because we're living off so many gifts of our parents' generation. And I think we're in desperate need of exactly what you said, which is what is the narrative, not of getting out of the war, what's the narrative of the next 75 to 150 years? It's a big question, but I'm so curious, what do you think the answer to that is?
First of all, I don't know that I have the answer. Let's start like that. But it's what I've dedicated a lot of my time to. It's a topic that I spend time obsessing about because I think there's a number of vectors that one needs to examine. One is, what is the purpose of the Jewish people? I think if you ask most people until 1948, it was surviving. And I think if you ask between 1948 and 1967, it was surviving. And then 67 looked great in Israel. And then came 73. And then it was surviving again. And it's become a very thriving place, Israel, over the last 20 years. And now, there's a national trauma, which should be a global trauma. And at the same time, the world is changing really, really rapidly right now, right? We're headed back to a bipolar, maybe multipolar world. There's only 15 million of us or 14 million of us in the world, of 8 billion people. Europe's having its own challenges. The United States is a fractured country. That's never good for the Jewish people. Until October 7th, which I prefer to call, by the way, the Simchat Torah massacre, rather than October 7th. On the day after the Simchat Torah massacre, there's a lot of Jews around the world that have found their identity again. They've discovered that people they thought were their friends are no longer their friends. And I think the last thing that's happened, if you think about it this from a Jewish perspective, is, the rabbinic class has very little to say and very little impact right now. This is not something that surprises me. I've read about this before. There was 2,000 years of kingship, malchus, monarchy, and kahuna, 2,000 years of rabbinic hegemony, and probably 30 years ago we passed into something else. It was just the beginning, and we've past the end of the rabbinic period, in my view. And that's diffusing. And we need a raison d'etre for the Jewish people at this point. I have my own thoughts about what it should be, which is this notion of a economy and class of empowering and brotherhood that sets a model for the world of what a society which has a bond. The bond is both historic and religious in this case. Religious with a small r, not a big R. Religious in this case with a shared heritage and a shared belief system in one God in this case, and has a message to the world that because of that brotherhood, we will risk ourselves, we will sacrifice ourselves, not just to help people live like what happens in the army, but to help people live a life of more potential. Because when we succeed as a collective, we will succeed better as a people. And I think that is something uniquely Jewish. I've called this covenantal capitalism. That's the term I've coined. I wrote an article for Fortune about it. It's the title of my piece, Coming in Tradition. I think there's deeper parts to it. It's not just economic. That's the outcome of it. And I think it's deeply civilian and not top down.
I'm sure there are aspects of both, and the vision that you have been talking about is something that my eyes have only been opened up to now. But there's another thing, and I can hear it underneath your voice. You are not afraid of being somewhat disruptive. You have to be if you're going to be a venture capitalist. But I'm curious about your thoughts about, again, when I mentioned unity, you went right away to the diaspora initially. We like talking about unity and how unified we are. You were raised in the United States. You know it well. I'm sure many of your employees are people who are recent olim or people who are making this transition. What do you hope the effects of October 7th or the Simchas Torah massacre, as you hauntingly refer to it, how do you think this should be transforming American Jewry? And I can hear it in your voice that there's both obviously a pragmatic optimism. There's some very beautiful things we've seen. I can also hear, because you're not so subtle about it, maybe I'm totally wrong, frustration about how this should be changing the conversation, the trajectory of American Jewry. You're describing this utopian vision of a civic revolution in Israel. What is the vision for American Jewry?
First of all, I don't think it's a utopian vision at all. And that brings me back to Herzlian Zionism that you asked about at the beginning, which is Herzl wrote a book I encourage everyone to read. I think most American Jews don't read it, called Alt Neuland, right? Which is this utopian vision for Israel. But in reality, Herzl was a nobody. He was a journalist, covered the Dreyfus Affair. He had an awakening of his Jewishness. He was a nobody. He gathered up tens, hundreds of people for the first Zionist conference. And in Basel, I established the Jewish state. And you go, like, what? That took like another 50 years. What do you mean? But he did, because ideas are powerful, because ideas that empower people are powerful, because ideas that move civilians, rank and file civilians, against the prevailing wisdom are powerful. I have another friend, he's much older than I am, who passed away 2 days ago. His name is Edward Cohn. Edward Cohn was a well-known British stockbroker, moved to Israel in his 50s or 60s, set up shop here, got married, kids, etc. And when I first started in business, I asked 10 people for 10 minutes of their time for advice. One of the people I went to was Edward Cohn. And I walked into his apartment on Al Roi Street in Jerusalem. I said to him, Edward, I didn't know that well. I'm here for 10 minutes. What's the best piece of advice you can give me? He looked at me and said, Michael, buy low and sell high. And I looked at him and said, Edward, that's what you have to tell me? And he said, if it's so obvious to you, then why does everybody do the opposite? Like my jaw dropped. That was like a moment, which is most people want to be with the herd. Unfortunately, the herd ends up in the wrong place most of the time, the vast majority of the time. And so Herzl was against the herd. The Rabbanim were the herd. Think about it. The Rabbanim were the herd. And he started a civic movement. And now I think today we have another chance for a civilian movement to reclaim the Yiddishkeit, the Judaism that matters, the Israeliness that matters, to reclaim a explicit belief that we have a shared history and a shared destiny to make our country and our people better. And there have been arguments in our people since time immemorial. This week's Parsha, okay? Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz migurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. Yaakov dwelt in Zant. What happens? A fight among the brothers. We have been living this folly for a long time. For what it's worth, it might be in our DNA. We may have to live it thereafter. I pray not. But that's why I don't want to cover things or gloss it over with unity. The way to get people to unify is not to talk about unity and not to gloss over differences, but to create shared purpose and to create shared action. The army is shared action. By the way, the rally in Washington would have been shared action, okay? And the Lamaise trumps the learning all the time, and it trumps the lip service all the time. When you do together, so you live together. When you talk about it, you don't. And so ask me what I want for American Jewry, I'll tell you. I want them to move here. That's the first thing. I've said that before, for their own identity, by the way. I don't even tell you about the assimilation statistics. You know them better than I do. I wrote about it, but that was 7 years ago. And it's happened all over the place. We forget about this. They like to talk about anti-Semitism, what's going on now. Anti-Semitism brings us closer together. Shinshul for Hirsch writes this in a few places. But we quietly lose people to assimilation. When you go through Spain, Germany, Haredi world likes to talk about a lot, the Olam HaTorah. They forget to tell you that half those people, or 60% of those people in 1870 and 1930, they all left. Never to be heard from again until Hitler, Yamach Shmuel came about. And so we got to get shared purpose and shared action. Doing things together matters more than anything. And so what I'm hoping the Simchas Torah Massacre does is it brings people out to movement. It means people out to do. So what do I like to see? Every yeshiva high school, every Jewish kid shouldn't just come for birthright for 10 days. Comes for the junior year of high school, not college, junior year of high school. Because who we are gets made in high school, not in college. Okay? Before they decide that the SATs is the hamster wheel for success, they should come work on a farm for 2 months. They should come here and do army training and do together with people who maybe speak English with a funny accent. Okay? That's number one. Number two, invest money here. When we invest money instead of giving charity, we got what to lose. On the charity, we take the tax write-off. When you invest money, you form a sense of partnership and you come and you check up on your investments and you hope to make money, so you invest more time in it. I'm not being mezalzel and tzedakah. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not, demeaning people give tzedakah. It's super important.
God forbid.
It's super important. But to do together, to partner with people in a deeply meaningful, not in a ephemeral way, in a deeply meaningful way will matter.
The way for a common guy like me, I assume you're not plugging your venture capitalist fund to the 1840 listeners. No, maybe you are.
Definitely not.
But how does one invest in Israel? What's the easiest way? I'm invested in Teva, the pharmaceutical company. That's an Israeli company. But the average person, if they wanted to actually invest in Israel, what do you think is the easiest way to do it? An ETF on the Israeli economy? What do you do?
Look, I'm not an investment advisor. I can barely manage my own business. That's the first thing, okay?
Okay. There are ways.
Yeah, listen, you can buy farmland. It's not tricky. Farmland's been a pretty decent investment in Israel. I don't know if you know this, but the biggest investment of farmland in America is Bill Gates. He probably knows what he's talking about. And there are others who are big investors in farmland. There's a million things you can do to invest even a little bit of money and get what Rabbi Fuld once called to get a piece of the rock, which is a wink to an old Prudential commercial. But investing money and owning a piece of the rock matters, and it's not just having an apartment in Israel. It's more than that. There's a guy I'm very fond of. I won't mention his name for his own sneeze. There was a farmer in bad shape just outside of Jerusalem. He gave him a loan, which converted to an equity investment, thank God. And now they're partners on a farm that's got 3,000 date trees and a couple thousand olive trees. And the guy earns a living and he employs 20 kids. And God bless, Baruch Hashem. I mean, he's emotionally invested in it. And that matters. We're emotionally invested in it. You take your kids there and show them, without me, these date trees don't exist here. And they don't protect our land. And you go there, when you pick your own dates. I have a farm myself, right? When I plant my avocado trees or our Jerusalem artichoke or our vineyards, and I make my own wine, it matters. You touch the land. It matters. You touch the people. You touch the kids. It matters. Is
there anything else that you think is integral, particularly for American Jewry, for getting more involved and kind of being able to participate in what I think we both hope will be a real Ummah Haaretz Deya? The world will be filled with this civic revolution.
Again, we need to focus on doing, not talking. That's the key. We need to focus on doing, and doing again. And so I would love to see partnerships that say, hey, what they call Otef Aza here, the villages around Gaza were taken down. What is the partnership between, I'm making it up, Teaneck or Lakewood, and putting up a factory in Kfar Aza? I was down in Be'eri in Kfar Aza again, I think it was last week, I can't remember anymore. And I ran into a group of some Chassidim, they would call, I guess, more yeshivish or Chassidish guys in Kfar Aza. And they asked me to talk to them because my English was good and I think they were being spoken to in Hebrew and their Hebrew wasn't particularly good. By the way, another thing, everyone's got to start learning Hebrew. It's embarrassing.
It is so embarrassing.
That these kids with 12 years of yeshiva education can't read a Ramban al Torah in its original and can't read a menu in an Israeli restaurant. It's this can't be Jewish education. It can't be.
I don't want to crush you or ruin our friendship, but I can type fluently in Hebrew like I type in English. I can read fluently an academic paper. I don't speak because I'm so embarrassed over my locution, my accent. It's too embarrassing for me. I understand fluently. I'm mortified.
I've heard 30 years. I always say I write books in Hebrew because there's no accent when you write.
Correct.
I still have my American accent, and you can laugh at me. People can laugh at me about it. It's okay. My kids do. And so imagine if we have a group of business people from Lakewood, from Muncie, from Teaneck, who say, you know what? I'm all in. We're going to go build factories, communities, things in Otef Aza. We're going to go figure out, and we're turning up to do it. This is not going to be done by remote control. We're turning up because we got to supervise it. We're turning up to do that. Joint project. Okay, next thing. There's Israeli schools that, I'm making this up, this is true though, that have kids going out doing agricultural work from 5 a.m. to noon, and then they start their studies in the afternoon, learn Tanakh, they learn math, path, etc. Okay, we're going to go create farms, that are around the Negev to make sure we don't lose our land down there. And these are going to be businesses, and there should be a business plan. Americans are very good at business plans and much better at management, quite candidly, than Israelis are. Managing at scale. Let's bring that management expertise. Let's bring that investment acumen. Let's bring that, will to scale up to a bunch of these joint ventures, but do them here and do them right. There's, I think, a reticence because of the old joke, the best way to make a small fortune in Israel is to come with a big one, that I can't make money in Israel. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's going to be true in the future. I think we're going to enter, when we get the full scope of the resilience from the Simchas Torah massacre, I think we'll see that Israel will become a bigger regional power, not a smaller regional power. And this will be a way to do business around the region and other parts of the world in the Southern Hemisphere, which is emerging. And we need to look at it at a global scale. I'm sorry to be so passionate about this. I hope I don't scare off your listeners.
No, you're fantastic. I love your passion. I love your intensity. There are certain topics I know gets you revved up.
We haven't even talked about Torah yet. That's what I really want to talk about. We'll do that another time.
I'm just curious, in your own business, did you ever experience an investor who your connection to Israel is right? In the title, it's right up front. It's called Aleph. It's a venture capitalist fund. But I'm curious if you ever had issues with your association with Israel until now, and are you ever worried post October 7th that certain investors or people who you would really want to have on board are now deliberately distancing themselves from associations with Israel?
I want to make a generic comment, then I'll make a specific one. The generic comment that I've observed, I wrote a post that you can find on Twitter X 2.5, 3 weeks ago about our kids as the defining generation for the world and for the Jewish people. Our kids who got out from behind their screens. Everyone was worried our kids can get back behind these screens. They got out from behind them and went to fight for what was important in Gaza and in the north. And I have kids in Gaza. My nephews are all up north on the Lebanese border. And this is the defining generation. I wrote that after I came back from a Goldman Sachs technology investment conference in Las Vegas that I debated whether I should go to, not go to. I said I should just go. And I had quite an audience there. And what I discovered on that trip is I think investors in corporate America are with Israel this time. Corporate America is a code name for big business and people care, whereas the disenfranchised call it, I'm not sure that's the right term, or the discontented, that's a better term, discontented, who came out of the wokeism of the last decade, the cancel culture of the last decade and a half. Angry people are against Israel right now. And I think that's a difference between this time and many other times in the past. The rape of women and the terrible atrocities committed by Hamas, I hope, has woken people up that there is a difference between good and evil. I can tell you, and this goes to the micro point, our investors have been incredible. I want to call them out and single them out. They have been incredibly supportive. They all reached out immediately afterwards. They are the most incredible people on the planet.
Your investors are not all Jewish, correct?
Not all Jewish, none of them almost. These are big institutions who run public pools of money and other private pools of money. I think if 5 to 10% is Jewish, it'd be a large number, who come mostly from America, a little bit from the UK, and some from the Emirates, tiny bit from the Emirates. And they have been just the most remarkable partners that anybody could ask for. Remarkable.
Your investors in the Emirates were with you after October 7th?
Every one of our investors reached out to see how we were doing, what they could do to help. Everything in life is personal, and personal relationships matter. And I just want to give a shout out to our investors around the globe. They are just incredible. Incredible. I hope somehow they listen to your podcast on 1840. Maybe I can expand your audience.
Try. No, the Emirates, we're a little weak in the Emirates. We got listeners in the UK.
We have a tiny bit of money from the Emirates. Very tiny. But 95+% of them are, 97% of them are from the UK and the US. And they have been just remarkable supporters and people. God bless them, really. I think that speaks to the importance of Israel, the importance of Israeli innovation. We are an innovative economy. There aren't that many places in the world you can build an innovative place. There's, the Bay Area. There's New York. There's a little bit in London. There's some in China, which is harder to invest in these days. I've never invested there, but there's some in India. But it's really Israel and the Bay Area and New York are the big innovation centers, and a little bit Austin, Texas. And thank God they've stayed with us, and I'm super appreciative.
Michael Eisenberg, it is such a privilege to speak with you. This was a long time coming, and I hope this is the first of many conversations that we have together, both recorded and privately, because personal relationships do matter, and I treasure ours. And I just can't thank you enough. I think this vision of a civic revolution, bottom up, which is, God forbid, not the revolution where we overthrow or kind of destroy authority, but actually work in unison with more traditional bodies. We're not advocating for an an overthrow of the Israeli government.
No.
Just so our listeners are 100%. I just want to make sure our listeners are 100% clear. I always conclude my interviews with more rapid fire questions. I wonder if you could indulge me. You've written several books, but I'm wondering, aside from the books of your own, which of course we'll mention and link to, what do you think are the books that unlocked your thought about the centrality of kind of that civic movement, the possibilities that Israel offers?
Number one is the Torah. I think it's very obvious there from the verses in Parshat Shoftim in Deuteronomy about limiting the power of the monarch, the number of times that the word brother is mentioned across Vayikra, Leviticus, and Devarim, Deuteronomy. That has had the most influence on me by a long shot. That's number one. There's another book called Range by David Epstein. That is an incredible book that I think is valuable. There's another book called Red Notice, which sits up here on my shelf alongside the Sfarim by Bill Browder. It's a critically important book about bravery against tyranny, particularly Russian tyranny in this case, and I think it's a super important book for people to read.
It's so funny you mentioned that. I believe one of my dearest friends, Maishi, who is a frequent listener and who is a brilliant investor, I never try to reveal his last name, but he actually bought me a copy of Red Notice. It's on my shelf as well. Okay, two Range, Red Notice, anything else you want to add? And obviously the Torah, that's clear anytime we speak together.
Yeah.
Any other books you want to mention, or?
Unquestionably, Halachic Man has had a big influence on my life by the Rav Soloveitchik. And I think you can read Halachic Man in many ways. The Rav is clearly a typology of a certain type of person where everything interacts with halacha. But I think there's something else. I think there's something about having to own it when it comes to halacha. You know, it's between you and God that creates a huge amount of self-efficacy and responsibility for everything we do in walks of life. And that book had a tremendous influence on me years ago. I've read it 2 or 3 times through my life.
Absolutely fantastic. My next question, I'm always curious, if somebody gave you a great deal of money and allowed you to finally quit your venture capitalist job and go back to school to get a PhD in whatever subject you wanted, what do you think the subject and title of that dissertation would be?
I have zero interest in going back to school and being peer-reviewed by anybody. I'm being serious about this.
I know you are serious. I am looking at your face right now. I'm actually not surprised by the answer. I could tell as I was asking it, he's not going back to school.
Yeah, I think peer review dampens creativity because you got to get through. And had they thought about these ideas, they would have done them themselves. And I'm not a fan of the peer review system. I don't think that a PhD right now in what interests me in life would make any contribution. And I think in general, most of the universities in America have lost their way significantly and are focused on all the wrong things. I don't find it valuable right now. I hope that's not heresy.
No, I very much appreciate it. And honestly, a lot of what you say sometimes is heresy of traditionally accepted views, and that's why we love you so much. My final question, I'm always curious about people's sleep schedules. What time do you go to sleep at night, and what time do you wake up in the morning?
Oh gosh, I'm not proud of this, but I'm basically not able to sleep very late, so it doesn't matter what time I go to sleep at night. I'm generally up at 5:20 without an alarm clock. I don't know why. Last night was a rough night. I went to see my cousin after he got notified that his son was killed. And this morning I tried to sleep late. It didn't go terribly well. And so I don't have a time I go to sleep. Since I hit 50, I've been trying to get to sleep earlier. It hasn't worked that well. I wake up at 5:20 in the morning. Doesn't matter what's going on. And I don't know why. I'd like to fix it, to be candid. But I try not to waste my time, at least if I'm getting up that early in the morning. I want to say something to you if I can.
Please.
I want to thank you. I sent you a WhatsApp after a podcast you did not long ago around the topic of infidelity, etc. And I think I also sent you one after you interviewed Tamara Eisenberg.
Tamara Eisenberg. That's a while ago in our Halacha series.
I think you've tackled just incredibly difficult topics in an incredibly sensitive and thoughtful way. I think you're doing a great service to the Jewish people. And I think you're a great chavrusa for many people out there and a breath of fresh air that you're not afraid to tackle hard topics. And I speak for myself when I tell you, I think you're a big breath of fresh air. So thank you.
Michael, that means the world to me. People who've been listening long enough know I desperately need the chizuk, especially now. It's taxing. Everybody in their own lane trying to find that purpose, and the chizuk and encouragement that you've given me and the guidance over the years really means the world to me. And I am so grateful for our first, God willing, of many conversations together in 1840, and just continued strength in all of your incredible work, both online, in all the businesses, and helping empower and create that civic revolution that the Jewish people so desperately need in this moment.
David, please come visit us here. We'll do a podcast live here.
Amir Tashem.
Listeners to come.
My conversation with Michael Eisenberg reminded me me of a Torah that honestly, if I hadn't seen it in print, it's quoted by somebody, I've seen it in print by serious people, I would assume it is outright heresy, and I mean that absolutely seriously. The Talmud in Sota, the very last page of Sota, quotes the effects of the destruction of the temple, where the Talmud says, Mishacharav Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and it starts listing all of these terrible things that had happened. There was shame in the world. Heads were kind of lowered, and people of action dwindled. People were really doing things and changing the world. And all of these terrible things happened. And after listing all of these terrible things that happened, the Talmud concludes, Al mi lanu lehishain, on whom is there for us to rely, Al Avinu Shebashamayim, on our Father in heaven. And there is like a stirring and almost heretical, had I not seen it quoted in the name of somebody quite serious, but an absolutely soul-stirring idea that Rav Itzela Mivolozhin says. Rav Yitzchak of Volozhin, he was sometimes known as Rav Itzela Mivolozhin. He was one of the Rosh Yeshiva, the heads of the Volozhin Yeshiva. He was the child of Rav Chaim of Volozhin, who was one of the foremost, if not the most foremost student of the Vilna Gaon. And he asked a very basic question. We have all of these terrible curses that took place after the destruction of the temple. There are all these terrible things. And then it ends with something that seems to be very positive. Ein lanu lihishan, we have no one else to rely on, Ella al Avinu Shebashamayim, except our Father in heaven. I thought we were listing all the bad things. Isn't this a good thing that we are just relying on God, on our reliance on the divine in the world? Why is that on the list? And he says something that's frankly jaw-dropping. I saw this many years ago, and then I saw it again, almost haphazardly quoted in the work of my dear friend and mentor, somebody who's guided me, Rev Daniel Stein, who is a Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshiva University. He has a beautiful sefer called Chamudei Daniel. And I was actually looking at it on Parshas Miketz, and I saw he quoted this idea. And if Rev Daniel Stein quotes it, then it's probably not actual heresy. Rav Yitzchak Mivolozhin says as follows. He says, you know what? Sometimes part of the curse is the fact that the Jewish people can be left, and all they can say is Ein lanu lihishain ella al Avinu Shebashamayim. That we can be left in a circumstance where we are so helpless, where we feel like we have no agency, that all we are left to say is upon whom can we rely? Only on our Father in heaven, only on God. And sometimes that in and of itself can be a curse. It's a curse because it obscures the agency of the Jewish people, being able to organize, being able to have the courage, the focus, the activism, to be able to change and transform their own situation. And when we are left in a situation of absolute helplessness, that nobody else can help us, but we need some divine intervention, we need a miracle, and that's the only thing that can change us, that in and of itself, that attitude, that perspective, is sometimes a part of the curse. Because true blessing is the sense that we always have agency, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu and God works through the Jewish people. We don't always have to wait in anticipation for a miracle, but the agency remains within our hands, within our capabilities, and that we, citizens, civilians, the civic revolution, everything that we spoke about in the conversation today with Michael Eisenberg, is turning back this curse of exile and saying, you know what, we don't just have to sit back and cry out helplessly in despair, Al mi lanu lehishain al Avinu Shebashamayim, upon whom can we rely upon? Only our Father in heaven. But there's a moment now where we see our Father in heaven, we see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we see God working through us, through the Jewish people, giving us strength, giving us agency, giving us focus, and giving us the ability to transform our own lives. This is the civic revolution that is taking place before our eyes, that isn't just going to transform Israel, it isn't just going to transform the Jewish people, but we hope and pray that this can be a model for the form of agency that can uplift the entire world. So thank you so much for listening. This episode, like so many of our episodes, was edited by our dearest friend, a hero, somebody who has worked tirelessly really since the moments after Yontif, Dina Emerson. We are so grateful for you. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our episodes, please subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends about it. You can also donate at 1840.org/donate. And I just want to pause for a second. A lot of people have been sending in donations, especially now, and I want you to know it really, really helps, because we're not going out, and there's so many other causes in this moment, particularly related to Israel, that I am hesitant to kind of do a full court press, even though we really desperately need it. But I am so grateful for those listeners who have expressed either in words, in financial support, in whatever way, the listeners who see the work that we're trying to do. And it has not been easy, but it's very far down on the list of things that we need to worry about right now. But people who have reached out and given us, whether it's just word of encouragement, financial support, big, small, whatever it is, it means so much to us. And really from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And of course, it really helps us reach new listeners and continue putting out great content. You can also leave us a voicemail with feedback or questions that we may play on a future episode. That number is 516-519-3308. Specifically, I am looking now for people who grew up either in the Israeli Haredi world, in the ultra-Orthodox world, who are reconsidering, re-examining their relationship with the state of Israel, re-examining their relationship with Zionism. I would love to hear from you. You could reach out, leave us a voice note, email us. I really, really want to hear from you. That is a story that I'm so desperate to share with our audience. And just a reminder of two exciting 1840 initiatives. Our weekly Reading Jewish History in the Parsha, where every week we examine an idea in the Parsha through the lens of Jewish history and the books and articles that brought me to it. You can get the audio exclusively on the All Parsha app run by the OU, or you can sign up for the Substack, which have all the links to the books and articles that I quote. It's a lot of fun and can give you something really enjoyable, uplifting to read over Shabbos. You can subscribe to the Substack at readingjewishhistoryintheparsha.substack.com. And of course, another reminder for our incredible book journey. The book journey is an initiative sponsored by my dearest friend, Morty Jacobs. I am so grateful to Morty for being a true partner in this entire initiative. Our next book journey is starting December 24th, and you can join our newest book journey with Malka Simkovich on what is the essence of anti-Semitism. Sadly, this topic has been especially relevant over the last 2 months, but this book journey is really working with Malka's expertise. She's an incredible professor, and she understands the history, the fundamentals, and the core characteristics of anti-Semitism. It's really going to be something incredible. You have until December 20th to sign up on our website. That's 1840.org/Simkovich Book Journey. Simkovich is spelled Simkovich Book Journey. 1840.org/Simkovich Book Journey. It's $18.40 a month. It's an amazing opportunity to support our work while immersing into the world of books and ideas. So be sure to check both of that out. Our next book journey with Malka Simkovich and Reading Jewish History in the Parsha. So if you'd like to learn more about this topic or some of the other great ones we've covered in the past, be sure to check out 1840.org. That's the number 18, followed by the word 40, Forty, 1840.org, where you can also find videos, articles, recommended readings, and weekly emails. Thank you so much for listening, and stay curious, my friends.
Shomer Yisrael Shemor She'eris Yisrael V'yal Yovad Yisrael Omrim Shema Yisrael Shomer Yisrael Shemor She'eris Yisrael V'yal Yovad Yisrael Omrim Shema